Welcome to the Humanity Rising MVP Leadership Challenge. This session is on being an active bystander, leadership in action. As a result of this session, you will be able to define what it means to be a bystander. You'll understand the role that active bystanders play in situations where bullying and abuse occur. Understand why some people remain silent or choose not to intervene when observing or witnessing bullying or abuse. And finally, identify specific ways to get peers to be active bystanders and prevent bullying and abuse before they happen. So look at this cartoon. What makes this cartoon funny? Sorry, I don't want to get involved. What makes this cartoon stand out as being odd or funny is the fact that the very person who we would assume to be that bystander, that active bystander in the situation here, is basically saying, I don't want to get involved. And I oftentimes think, how many times have I felt like the person with the hands in the air? I've been in a tough or awkward situation, and I was hoping that somebody would help me out or help intervene in that situation, but nobody did. That's what makes this cartoon funny. So how do you define what it means to be a bystander? Think about that for a second. You may have thought a bystander is someone who observes something happening to somebody else, and you would be correct. A bystander is a witness to a crime or harmful behavior. A bystander is someone who remains silent and chooses not to speak out against bullying or abusive behaviors. A bystander is a friend, a teammate, a classmate, peer, or an acquaintance. But in the end, isn't a bystander technically all of us? What powers do bystanders have? Have you ever thought about that? Do bystanders have power? And if they do, then how do they have power? Pause this video for just a moment. Take about 45 seconds. Think to yourself, do bystanders have power? And if so, write it down. How do bystanders have power? 45 seconds, you're on the clock. Go. Thanks for thinking. Yes, we believe bystanders have a lot of power. In fact, in situations like the one described here with two young men upset and angry with each other, oftentimes in those situations, other peers will form a circle around these two young men, and they may yell things like, fight, 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 or they may just stand there and laugh and prod each one of those young men on, and in essence, ramping up that situation and making it worse, whereby neither one of these two young men have any choice or any option but to fight. And the power of those bystanders will hold those two young men inside that circle, face to face, knowing that the only way out is going to be physical violence or physical aggression. So bystanders have a lot of power. Jackson Katz is the founder of the MVP strategies. And here he's talking to a group of high school students who are interested in knowing more about being an active bystander and what they can do to create and form healthier relationships, but also increase the culture and climate in their respective schools and communities and neighborhoods. Let's hear what Jackson has to say.
And it includes everybody, because everybody's a bystander, right? Everybody's a friend, a teammate, a classmate, a co-worker, a family member. Everybody has peer cultures and social groups. The idea here is to say to people who are bystanders, who are friends, teammates, and classmates, what can you do to speak up? What can you do when you see abusive situations? What can you do to support your friends, to challenge your friends, to interrupt the abusive behavior when possible? Do it safely, but do it. And that was the heart of our thinking when it came to creating the MVP model. And my feeling from the beginning has been there's an awful lot of young people, men and women, boys and girls, who are not comfortable with the abusive behavior that we see around us. We don't appreciate it, we don't like it, but we often don't do anything in the face of it because because we're scared, because we don't know what to do, because we haven't seen it modeled for us before, because there might be social pressure on us to be silent. Because, you know, silence comes up over and over again when talking about bullying and harassment and abuse, doesn't it? And it's not just the silence of the victims. Because, again, a lot of people think, okay, victims are silenced by what's being done to them. And I appreciate that that's happening. But you know what? Bullying and violence and harassment silences more than just victims. It silences people around the victim because they don't want to become a victim, and it silences people around the bully or around the abuser because people don't want to become the victim. And often we also know from research over the past generation that an awful lot of abusive behavior is enacted by boys and girls who are popular, not who are some schoolyard bully standing in the corner, kind of ominous looking in the ogre Shrek-like sense, but rather normal, average people, including popular people, right? So oftentimes the person doing the bullying has some social power, and so people don't want to challenge the bully because they don't want to take a risk that by challenging the bully or the abusive person, they're going to somehow get it back on them. So what happens is an awful lot of silence as a result. And again, I'm convinced there's an awful lot of people out here, and out in the world who are good people, most people are good people, who just don't say anything, they don't do anything. So how do you get them to say something? And how do you get them to interrupt other people's abusive behavior?
So first of all, what keeps people silent? So refusing to help someone else out who's in a situation that may be harmful or potentially abusive, what keeps people silent? And to Jackson's question, how do you get people to speak up? How do you get students to speak out? One of the first things to look at is to look at the ways that get in the way, the things that get in the way of being an active bystander. And when you think about that question, one of the things that may come to mind is thinking that there's a lack of social influence that the person have. That as a young person, I may say to myself, I don't think I have the social status or the influence to make a difference. I'm not sure that my peers or these two young boys, for example, who are upset and mad with each other, that they're going to listen to me. So my social influence is being diminished, or I don't think I'm going to be as influential. Another reason that young people say, and oftentimes adults as well, as to what gets in the way of being active bystander, is the fear of being embarrassed, that something that may be said, or they may do something that causes some type of embarrassment. And that's just too risky for some young people or adults to handle. Others have stated out loud that for fear of retaliation is why they chose not to get involved. And that's a real consequence. And that's something that gets in the way of a lot of folks determining the extent to which they would want to get involved. Being the target of abuse or bullying is not something that we would want to bring upon ourselves, and that retaliation is a real concern. Some students and some adults would say, it's none of my business. I'm not familiar with the folks with the two students, or with the person who's having a problem or being targeted. We're not close peers. We don't share a lot of activities. It's just none of my business. It's just best if I just kept my nose out of it. And that's another reason why people refrain from being an active bystander. And finally, thinking that it's someone else's responsibility, that someone else has better skills, more talent, more experience in dealing with this, or they're closer to the situation. And so that sense of responsibility is a key issue in terms of being an active bystander, but viewing a bullying situation or other form of abuse as someone else's responsibility is a way to keep someone from not responding. So how do you get friends, teammates, classmates to speak up when someone is being bullied or harassed? Well, pause this video for a moment. Take 60 seconds. Think to yourself, how could you personally get your friends, teammates, and classmates to speak up when they witness someone being hurt or harmed Take 60 seconds. Think to yourself. You're on the clock. Go. Thanks, and welcome back. So during that time, you may have thought to be an active bystander and speak up that you could personally maybe let friends and peers know that you're not okay with what's going on, that this bothers you, that it's just not right. You saying something out loud or making the initiative could make all the difference in the world. Also, educating other peers on what it means to be empathetic, walking in their shoes, getting in touch with how they may be feeling, and just being a friend. I mean, these are simple yet really key issues on being the active bystander. Modeling for others what you would do in a situation or what you may have done in previous situations would be incredibly helpful for other peers to hear and see and observe. Modeling. We lack role models around prevention, and you could be that role model. Or challenge school and community leaders that you know who could support bullying and violence prevention programming in your school or in your neighborhood organization. Working with key leaders in your community and school could have a profound impact on the prevention work that happens forward, and you could be a part of that, working it on the ground floor. And finally, starting an MVP movement with your friends, being that mentor in violence prevention, working with younger peers who are struggling, having challenging times, getting along with others, seeing themselves as being isolated, not likable. These are all opportunities for us to demonstrate friendship and to demonstrate empathy. And finally, active bystanders are leaders. Leadership takes courage, takes determination, it takes confidence. It also means taking some risks. And that's what active bystanders are. They're leaders. They're leaders in schools, they're leaders in peer groups, they're leaders in neighborhoods, in other organizations, in church groups, etc. Active bystanders are leaders. Thank you for going through this MVP challenge, MVP leadership challenge on being an active bystander, leadership in action. And thank you for speaking up and speaking out against bullying and all forms of abuse.